I'm Ashley Fox, and this is OUTFOXED. Michael Wilbon has been host of ESPN's hit show, Pardon the Interruption, for more than 20 years. A Chicago native and proud Northwestern graduate, Wilbon was a preeminent thought leader and columnist for the Washington Post before moving to ESPN. Wilbon has offered his opinion on all sports issues and hosted accomplished guests for more than 2 decades. He's also an unabashed fashionista. Welcome to OUTFOXED, Michael Wilbon. All right, yay. Well, I'm so grateful to have you, Michael Wilbon, in studio with us.
Thank you, Ashley, for having me.
Thank you so much. We've been friends for 25 years, I think.
Sounds about right.
And you were instrumental in my career. I remember when I met you, you said, "Why aren't you on television?" And we were at the PGA Championship at Valhalla in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the first thing you said to me, and then helped me kind of ascend through my career. So thank you for that.
Is that credit or blame?
It's probably a little of both, actually.
That's very kind of you.
But when we met, you were still at the Washington Post as a columnist and one of the preeminent thought leaders, I think, in the sports space at the time. And I'll never forget, you called me and said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity to do a show on ESPN, and I don't think I want to do it." And you were like, "I'm a writer, and this is kind of like who I am." And then, lo and behold, 20-some years later, you are still on Pardon the Interruption. Can you take me back through that? Like what that was like, decision-making, how you did it, and why that show has been, what is it, the longest running show on ESPN, I think, other than SportsCenter?
Man, the word unlikely describes the entire episode, which is still ongoing. It's 23 years now. It's not hard to believe. It's impossible to believe because there was no design. But the things that usually work best are not designed. We talk about things happening in an authentic way or organically, and that's a big part of it. That's the entirety of it. I was not looking to be in television, not interested, distrustful, still distrustful of television. Don't trust the medium, don't trust the people running it most days. Sorry, bosses. I don't mean of my program, I just mean of the industry. And so I wasn't looking to do it. If you ask me today what I am, I'm going to tell you a writer, even though I'm not anymore. I'm a broadcaster, but I'm loath to say it because that's not what I trained to do. That's not what I enjoyed. That's not what I think I do best. It's something I do. Tony and I, with the help of great producers, are good at that thing that we do. Is it what either one of us does best? No, it isn't. But the thing we do best has gone away. It doesn't exist anymore. The New York Times said, "To hell with the sports section, we're going to get rid of it." Mm-hmm. The LA Times has diminished its. And that's only a matter of time now before, it's RIP sports writing, which pains me, depresses me. But at the time, ESPN, a producer named Mark Shapiro, proposed putting us on television. Mark said, "One day I'm going to be something in this business." He was like 28 years old. "One day I'm going to be somebody. And when I am, the first thing I'm going to do is put you and Tony on television." This is 1998. And I said, "The next thing you're going to be after that is fired for being a fool for putting 2 sports writers on television." So fast forward 3 years, Sports Century project ends, and Mark calls me in LA and says, "We got to have dinner tomorrow." I said, "Mark, I'm in LA." He goes, "I know where you are. We got to have dinner tomorrow." I said, what could be that urgent? And he says, "I'm going to be named," I don't know what the exact title is, call it President of Programming tomorrow at ESPN. "And the first thing I'm going to do is put you and Tony on television." I'm like, "Dude, you've been having this fantasy for 3 years. This is stupid. And he's all right, just indulge me. Let's have dinner tomorrow. So we had dinner at the Ivy. He drew it out, his concept on a napkin. And that was during the finals. So whoever the Lakers were playing in the summer of 2001, Philly?
The Sixers, yes.
Okay, so that's the Allen Iverson, Tyronn Lue.
Stepping over Tyronn
That's
Lue.
that. And
One game one.
And one game one, and that was it. Then Shaq appeared. And so I met with him. We talked for 4 hours. And I called Tony, who gets up at 4 a.m. every morning. And I just, because it's now 1 o'clock in the morning in LA. So it is 4 o'clock in the morning in the East where Tony is in DC. And I just said, you got to give me 20 minutes to talk and say nothing, because our lives are going to change forever, which sounds completely overly dramatic. But he didn't say a word, because I think he sensed that I was going to say something that mattered. So we joked about it, and we didn't know what we were going to do, and we didn't say yes immediately, and we didn't say yes. It was in September. The show was supposed to air, and ESPN hadn't signed us to a contract yet. And we're like, you have to understand something. We don't care. We don't care about airtime. We don't care about who the producer is. We don't give a damn. We're writers and proud of it. We write for what we think is the greatest newspaper in the world, the Washington Post, and then we were locked in it with the New York Times every day. Mm-hmm. And I know our sports section was better. And so that's what we wanted to do. We didn't care about ESPN or being on every day, but we both cared about money. And that, that's just, people can be disingenuous about what drives decisions. Money drove the decision. And to be in a different platform on a daily basis. And we knew that sports writing was limping. The first few limps were the late 1990s and the early aughts. And we knew that. So here we are. Here we are all these years later. I said to Tony at one point, I know we can be good at this, but that doesn't mean anybody will care. So we can do this, but whether anybody will watch is another issue. And so fortunately for us, both were true.
You guys did that in the offices at the Washington Post.
Yes, we did.
Anyway,
yeah, and we kept working. By the way, here's how much we trusted it. I did both for 9 years. 9 years. I kept my column at the Washington Post and did it, though decreasingly. I didn't do 4 and 5 a week anymore, or 3 and 4 a week. I did 2. But I didn't trust television, and neither did Tony. But yeah, we did. We argued, and that's why Mark Shapiro saw it. That's why he knew it would work in his mind, because he'd seen it. He'd seen it. We did it across an aisle where people who were doing real work, like covering the White House, would scream, "Can you shut them up, please?" And the answer was no. F off. We're not shutting up. So we did what we do on television. We did that anyway for the previous 20 years. It's been 40 years of doing that. Just 20 on television.
Right. The first 20 in the toy department, as the sports department is often called.
Is often called. They dare not call it that in our sports department. We had people. We had David Remnick and Sally Jenkins and Thomas Boswell and David Aldridge later on. And we had award-winning, Pulitzer Prize nominated and finalists sports writers. Mm-hmm. So toy department, oh yeah? We got your toy department right here.
Sorry, I'll be speaking for me from the Philadelphia Inquirer toy department.
No, they wanted to call us that too. We were just chippy. And we had the decoration to prove it. Yeah.
The money aside, which obviously is a big driving factor. I mean, you had television experience before you got that position on the sports reporters and whatever else.
Don't forget Philadelphia's own George Michael.
And Philadelphia's own George Michael, Sports Machine.
That's right.
Right. I remember we were walking through downtown Atlanta, All-Star Weekend, NBA All-Star Weekend, and it was like you, me, and David Aldridge, I think. And it was like walking around with like a big-time celebrity, and you were still just like a writer for the Post. Like everyone stopped you because you just resonated with people. So then you go on television, you get the money, you get the larger sense of fame. How did that change your life? And did it change you at all?
I think it was too late to change me. That happened when I was 42 years old. PTI came along, I was 42. You're formed by then. You should be fully formed. I was not. Tony and I have healthy egos, but neither one of us is such an egomaniac that it's going to change. It does change practically what you do and how you live. Hell, I don't necessarily. Well, I had a house in Scottsdale before PTI, actually. Well, not before, but it was happening before. So it didn't even change that. I always say it changes your address. It changes your friends. It doesn't really. It changes your vacations. It does in incremental ways. It didn't change my fundamental life. Becoming a parent changed it much more dramatically, and that didn't happen for 7 more years. So, I don't know that it changed anything. It changed the reaction to us. It changed the perception of us. And it changed the way, I go into a gym, go into an arena, or, when people know you and they're shouting at you to take a selfie with them. It changes it changes your life in ways that shouldn't matter, but do. That was pre-social media. But did it change us? I don't. You'd have to ask other people who were fearless enough to weigh in with that. If you ask my brother, who's known me the whole time, if it changed me, it'd be interesting to hear his reaction. If you ask Jay Adante and David Aldridge, they've known me, since I was in my 20s. There was no television. There wasn't even sports reporters yet. Would they say that I'm fundamentally different? I don't know what they would say. I have no idea. I don't spend any time canvassing. I'm not running for office. I don't care largely what people think anyway. I never did. That's just the house I grew up in. It's not a popularity contest, so I don't give a damn. And so that's the way I've lived my life, and I hope I've not stayed true because it's a philosophy. I just hope that's the way I go through my life every day. There's more stuff you can do. Yes, I wear more Zegna than I used to. I mean, there's stuff that's completely unimportant. You get calls not just returned, you get calls initiated. Okay, so maybe a golf partner changed. Maybe I don't play golf with the 44th president of the United States if I'm not doing that show. But maybe I am, because he's a Chicago guy.
That's a name drop.
No, I didn't. I didn't mention a name. I'm leading people to have to figure out, some breadcrumb clues. So anyway, I don't know. To be answered, that's a long way of saying I don't know that I've changed fundamentally, and I hope kind of not.
I mean, you haven't changed since I've known you,
Well,
and
there we
you were a shoe and clothes guy before you ever got on PTI.
This is good to be reminded.
Yes,
I remember, but I just couldn't afford the same ones I do now.
I remember shopping for shoes with you in Minneapolis at a Final Four. Yes,
I wrote a column about that.
We go way back. All right, so since you did low key name drop, what is it like playing golf with 44?
Oh, geez, it's because
he seems like he would be a lot of fun.
It's totally fun. It's great fun. It's 5 hours of laughs and storytelling and perspective and being grounded and talking shit and talking about Chicago sports, which sometimes doesn't fit any of those boxes. But we're there's a lot in common. Age, I'm a couple of years older. What we do, habits. He married a South Side of Chicago girl, not neighborhood a couple over from mine. There's the Washington experience he's got now, having lived there 8 years. I've been there a little bit longer. There's a lot of stuff that isn't presidential. It's just sort of guys playing golf. That's what it's supposed to be. And that's when it's at its best anyway, when it doesn't matter. Your station in life doesn't really matter. If you can get to that, then that's the point.
Mm-hmm. I like to think that I have a lot of cool phone numbers in my phone, but I know you have even cooler ones, like 44. But I'll never forget, we were in St. Louis together we were in a car going to Brian Burwell's memorial service or his viewing. The great Brian Burwell, God rest his soul.
Friend.
And Kobe Bryant is texting you and is hothouse pissed at you about something. I can't remember what it was. And then
could have been a number of things.
And then called you while we were in the car. What, I miss him so much, but what did he mean to you? I think the saddest part I mean, there's lots of sad parts, but he was like getting ready to do
Yeah.
amazing
Yeah,
things
he
in the
was.
next stage of his
Yeah,
career.
he
He had
was.
just won
Academy Award.
an Academy Award.
Yeah.
What do you think when you think of Kobe?
There's a thing that there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's going back when he was young and impetuous and maybe didn't have the best judgment in a lot of situations. But there are things that stand out because they're personal. I think anytime you're talking about somebody who's not with us anymore, there's certain things that are frozen. And there's like him getting booed in Philadelphia at the All-Star game and me writing a column the next day for the Washington Post that day, just killing the fans of Philadelphia as much as I could in a family newspaper.
Because you hate Philadelphia, but it's okay.
No, I'm unafraid to take on Philadelphia. I actually don't hate Philadelphia. I hated Philadelphia that day for booing Kobe,
Yeah.
for booing a favorite son. I don't care what was going on with Philadelphia. I don't, can I say this on your podcast? I don't give a shit about Philadelphia. Doesn't mean I hate it. I don't. As a matter of fact, I have a certain respect. It's a real city. Philadelphia is a real place. There's some places in the world that aren't real. Philadelphia, you know what you get here. When I'm here, I enjoy myself. Now, that doesn't mean I can't get angry at a place. But anyway, so that's one of the things, the All-Star game. But there's so many other large things. There's winning an MVP finally, right? And I was supposed to go and do a sit down with Kobe, but that was a different sit. It was a sit down interview. It was Christmas time. I'd never seen my son on Christmas because we were working Christmas Day. And Kobe said, fine, I'm not doing the interview unless you bring him. And I go, I can't bring him. Let's not bring a kid to work day. And he's like, okay, I'm not doing it. Just tell ESPN I'm not doing it unless you bring Matthew, which I did. I took him with me. And Kobe took him on some walk somewhere, and I'm not allowed to this day to talk about to hear what that is. And Matthew was 8 then and 16 now. So anyway, there's stuff that's personal. I tell you, one of the uplifting was it really explained sort of who he was for people who didn't get to see this off camera. So he wins the MVP award, and I went out to LA to do a sit down with him, and when he did all these interviews in Italian, English first, and Italian, right? And then there's a Spanish journalist there who wants to do one in Spanish, but Kobe doesn't feel comfortable doing the interview in Spanish, not a full interview. Of course, to speak it off the cuff, he's okay, but he doesn't want to do it. So he's looking for an interpreter. He's asking, hey, is anybody out there? Can you interpret? Can we do this? Anybody speak Spanish fluently enough to be? And nobody did. And there's this young woman there with a crew, and she wants to do this interview in Spanish, and there's no interpreter. And so Kobe just goes, all right, oh, shit. And he just sits down, and he does it in Spanish fluently, completely not missing anything. And you could tell not missing anything because of her reaction. And he's doing it in a third language. He's doing it in another language. People have no idea how smart Kobe Bryant was. They have no idea. If the Academy Award doesn't tell you, and it should, this is not about basketball at this point. There's all kinds of other talents in there. And so the conversations were fascinating. His rants were fascinating. A call at 8:15 in the morning. You said what yesterday? You got you brunt of one of those through me. He was one of the most fascinating people I'd ever been around, and it's such a young man. But you know, I mean, Kobe was 23 going on 35, and that probably got him in some trouble sometime because he wasn't like which one is not like the others. Kobe Bryant was never like the others. And so it's hard to talk about for very long to lose that kind of human resource at a time where, all the industries he touched, storytelling. One of those interviews on a cutting room floor, he talked about what he wanted to do after basketball. And it was about storytelling. And somebody editing thought that wasn't worth getting in a piece about basketball. And in doing so, you miss what it is that Kobe had a vision. He already had the vision when he was MVP. It was, I'm going to do this other thing. And I'm going to be great at that. He wanted to be Walt Disney. And he might have been. Or something as great but different. I'm using Walt Disney I need to use an example of something otherworldly, and this man had that kind of talent and intellect and drive and ability to connect. It's hard. It's hard to just think about him not being here, not for any specific moment, but just for the rest of the time. It's hard to deal with. It's our loss.
Yep, I live right by Lower Merion High School.
Wow.
And several years ago, they redid the high school, and Kobe did the gym, and it's Bryant Gymnasium,
Wow.
which lives on. And like after he died, the memorial that just kind of organically appeared there was unreal. You know, basketball, sneakers, flowers. It was incredible.
Yeah.
It's such a loss. You've been around other superstar, galactic type athletes. Who else would you put up there with him? I mean, I know you covered the Dream Team at the Olympics, and that was
The greatest team ever assembled.
amazing.
Yeah.
But do you have a favorite or two favorites, or someone who's most challenging, most interesting?
You know, I for the most part, I don't. Because I think one of the reasons that these people, that we have these relationships is because I don't look at them like that. And I try to approach them when I was writing without a notebook and pen first or tape recorder first, enough to get, not just to gain trust, but to actually have some already. So yeah, I covered the career of Michael Jordan. I'm not going to be disingenuous. There's no other career like that, unless it's Ali's career. So Ali's career, Jordan's career, end of list. Pelé, if you're outside the country, okay. So now, what are we talking? We're talking Pelé, Ali, and Michael Jordan. That's it. Sorry to, Kobe's was different and would have unfolded differently and would have been just up there in a different way. But I mean, LeBron's career is unbelievable for a lot of reasons. But I'm not putting anybody with Jordan, not just with basketball. No, nobody. And I got to cover John Elway and a little bit of Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and Emmitt Smith and Troy Aikman. And so, yeah, there are a lot of great famous athletes. And I have relationships with almost all of them. Mike Tyson, all of them. But I don't rank them or put them, If you ask me who's the best person in a post-game circumstance after a game, it's LeBron James. Period. The best ever. His memory, if it's not photographic, is close. So he can do things and he can just regurgitate things, but he can summon images in his head that I don't know that anybody else could do. On the other hand, like, who's the most joyous athlete I've ever been around? Magic Johnson, who affects my own life because I went from covering him to working with him and then being a close friend. And so, yeah, his infectious personality, that has rubbed off on me in a number of tangible ways, which people can point out who live with me, that I'm better off for knowing Magic all this time. And there's no doubt about that. Christmas morning is a hard time to work 15-hour days, and I did it year after year after year. And some of those years, Magic was working with us on ABC, and it'd be like 7 o'clock in the morning. You're supposed to be in the studio by like 7:15, 7:30. You're angry. You're away from your family, 3,000 miles away in my case. And Magic would be in a suit and tie, and he'd have Starbucks downstairs for everybody. Hey, we're gonna have a great Christmas. Get up, let's go. We're gonna do live television. Isn't this great? No, Magic, go back to bed. Leave me alone. No, get up. We're gonna do this. And he'd order breakfast. He'd talk you into getting through the first hour and a half of it, and by the third hour, you were all right. Christmas Day was pretty good. And you realize he did this with a bunch of dopes doing television. Imagine what he was like in a locker room. Well, that was his locker room. His locker room was wherever he was. And so you learn why people are great. And what angers me about stuff like analytics is, God, don't get me started on it. There's a whole generation of, can we curse on this?
Sure.
Young, smart, ambitious, earnest, fucking morons who think that analytics can tell you everything about an athlete or a coach or a team when it can't tell you shit. It can't. It can't tell you how. Yes, you can see Magic Johnson's physical talent, but there were other guys who had similar talents. Why weren't they as good? Because there's other stuff that goes into the human drama of athletic competition, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. There's human qualities that go into it. So that's what I care about when watching them play, when listening to them talk about what they do, when getting to know them, maybe their families, maybe not, getting to know them over a long period of time through tragedy, through the loss of parents, of careers that wane, that rise, that are interrupted by injury or illness. Those are the things that I care about. And nobody wants to do that anymore. People just want to say, he had 14, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, and 5 last night. I don't give a shit. What does that mean? We just going to create. He's the fourth youngest person to do this by the age of 23. And that enhances my understanding of what? Not a goddamn thing. But that's what we've got. And we've got people think that's storytelling. It's bullshit. It's what it is. Which is why it's time for me to get out and time for me to have, if Magic was sitting here, he would have stopped this and said, all right, now we need an attitude adjustment.
Well, analytics doesn't, there's
tell
not
you
a
anything.
statistical category for heart or character.
It doesn't for
or
anything that matters.
drive.
For anything that matters.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that distorts and it has ruined sports. It's ruined sports on television for me in some ways. And these are very talented people who are doing the best they can. And it's very earnest. I'm not saying anybody's insincere. It's just stop. Just listen to something else. Really? The best story this week in football was the Los Angeles Rams wearing those T-shirts while they were warming up that supported the fire department, LA Fire Department, and talked about they did something that maybe the other team, I don't know what the Chargers did. Chargers got blitzed, and I didn't think it was possible to maximize any performance in those circumstances when you've got that tragedy looming in every sphere of your life. And the Rams managed to take it and do something with it. And I wonder if we got to the bottom of it, storytelling, which nobody knows how to do. What did they do in the locker room leading up? What did they talk about in the days leading up to it? Who led those conversations? Was that the coach? Was it a player who's been evacuated? How did the Rams get the spirit to play like they did on Monday night in Glendale? Where'd that come from? I don't care if somebody completed 10 of 11 passes on a drive. Where did the spirit come from to generate that, to inspire that? We don't have that in storytelling anymore. We have crap. And so people can just say, oh man, get off my lawn. I got some analytics to figure out here. I got to go second spectrum. But that's where I am.
You mentioned that you have I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's not I don't care, but it's like a toughness about you that you don't get wrapped up in the stuff that doesn't matter. And you said you've been that way forever. Where does that come from?
My parents, my father in particular.
Yeah. What was he like?
He was a tough ass dude. He fled Georgia at 19 years old, got on a train like millions, no exaggeration, millions, literally, of other African American people who were only a generation removed, or maybe 2 generations removed from slavery. And he worked his way up to Chicago, like my mother had when she was 14. My parents are tough people. Grew up picking cotton, as my father would say, slopping hogs and working on farms in Georgia and Tennessee, respectively, and one step removed from slavery. There's no other way to say it. And it was beyond Jim Crow South. They had no rights. They had nothing. And so they were tough mentally tough people. And so that was expected. What somebody cares about you is completely unimportant. this is how you conduct yourself. This is what you stick to, and stick-to-itiveness and personal resourcefulness. That carried the day, not words. So no, drama is not a welcome thing in the house I grew up in, not at all.
And you grew up in Chicago, went to Northwestern. When you went there, did you have a vision for what you wanted to be, who you wanted to be, what you wanted to do?
I wanted to be a sports writer. I could see that part of it because I was doing that, and I was doing more of that than studying junior year and senior years. And I worked for the Washington Post after my junior year of college. My junior to senior summer, I worked at the Post. I could see it because I was doing it. And senior year, I don't think I went to did I go to a class? I freelanced, I wrote, I prepared for that life. So yeah, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And that's kind of what I did the first 20 years. And then it changed, but I didn't foresee it, wasn't calling on it, wasn't looking forward. I had what I wanted. If I thought I was going to be the next Shirley Povich. Shirley Povich worked for 75 years for the Washington Post. I thought that I was going to do something like that. So I had it all, yeah. But it wasn't even, I never had 5 and 10 year plans. I didn't do any of that. I don't really believe in that. Just do the thing you're supposed to do. It's not like Bill Belichick. Do your job. Mm-hmm. Do that first, and then we'll see.
We're on to Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I had the great fortune of meeting you when I was 29. I had been in Philadelphia for a hot second. Thought I knew what I was doing, but really had not had, I had never covered the NBA, never covered the NFL. And I met you, I met Steve Weich, I met David Aldridge, I met Brian Burwell. And you guys really wrapped your arms around me and showed me the game. I mean, one thing that you taught me among many things is the whole idea of you go in a locker room and you don't have your notebook and a recording device out. Like you go and have conversations with people because it's a relationship business. And I've said this a bunch. I think, I would never pretend to understand what you went through as a Black man in this business. I know what I've been through as a female, and I don't think they're not siblings, but I think they could be considered cousins. What was the hardest thing for you, and how did you navigate, the challenges that existed covering sports, teams, franchises, leagues that were mostly at that time run by white men?
I don't think of them as challenges. One thing that helped me circumvent a lot of that stuff was just I was very lucky. Institutional credibility. Mm-hmm. I went to Northwestern, to Medill, the best journalism school in the world.
Of course.
I then worked for the Washington Post. That cuts off a lot of bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? It's in that day and time, it did. I mean, if you worked for the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Boston Globe, Wall Street Journal, of course, you got to circumvent stuff that way because you had this brand, yes, there were brands then, attached to you. I didn't pay a lot of attention to people who might have thought less of me. I know there were people who thought, he got this job because of some perceived extra advantage. But the great thing about being in sports, there's 2 areas covering sports and politics where a bunch of you are covering the same thing and you can see somebody's work. You can compare it. It's apples to apples. You're not comparing, you're not comparing a piece that might be in the food section on recipes to a game story the next day on what Allen Iverson did. You got a marketplace of ideas on what Allen Iverson did. You can compare the expression, the execution, the deadline performance of each of those people. So ultimately, there was going to be some objective criteria or something close enough. And I just thought, I'm going to do this the best that anybody's doing this at this press row tonight. And so I didn't pay any attention to perceived slant. I knew there were. I knew there were. And other people paid attention. I remember walking in to a press room one night with George Michael, the great George Michael, who for some reason saw fit to employ me for 13 years on television in Washington, D.C. We went into a press room with like 250 people during March Madness in the 90s. And George looked up and said, George, who is, for people who don't know, George, a white man from East St. Louis. Oh my God. George had more complicated stuff going on than anybody who made, who was a rock and roll king and a disc jockey and then a television icon. George walked in with me and he said, oh my God, where are the black people? Where are the people of color and the women? And the room was all white male. This is in the 90s. And I'm like, George, shut up. No, where are they? This is incredible. Look at this room. I'm like, George, please, we're on deadline here. And George walked into this world, and because he was George and he could be as bombastic as he wanted, he could call out something like that. We all saw it. But I don't know. It didn't bother me. I didn't pay any attention to it. But again, I could afford not to pay attention. If you were working at the Clarion Ledger in Mississippi, could you afford not to pay attention the same way a guy didn't have to pay attention who was well into six figures working for the Washington Post? No, those weren't equal. So I realized I had a platform and a level of insulation and a boss like George Solomon who George didn't care. Like sports sections might have one black person, one woman. George had like 5 black staff writers, 4 women, people writing columns. George didn't care. George did more to advance diversity in sports journalism than any one person on the planet. And I worked for him. So I didn't give a shit. So I didn't have many adjustments that I even bothered to need to make. I didn't have, the work could answer. The work could answer for itself.
Yeah, George was about DEI before DEI was
Didn't
a
even know what it
thing.
was. Yeah. Yeah.
You also, when you were at the Post, and I think still to this day, obviously, but were like the preeminent voice on talking about race issues in sports. And I mean, I know I learned so much just reading your work before we became friends. Why was that important for you?
It wasn't. Just saying what I had to say is important. It's funny because people will say, well, 70% of what you write is about race. I'm like, shut up. You're an idiot. Let's go back and take the last 50 columns I've written and let's see how many of them are about race. 4, maybe none of the 50. And then maybe 5 in a row. I mean, they were about sports. Now, in that context, there was stuff to observe. And if I got ready to observe it, I observed it. That was that. Very few times did anybody ask me to write about race. Very few times, if I was upset, if I was pissed off about something, I was going to write about that. That's because who I am. And it didn't take a committee. It didn't take great examination. There might have been some times somebody wanted me to write about it, and I didn't, because I didn't think it was necessary or was needed or was counterproductive, or I didn't feel it. And if I didn't feel it, it wasn't coming out of my fingers onto a typewriter. So I wrote about what I wrote about. And that was what affected me that day, what I was angry about. Arthur Ashe once said or wrote that being a black man in America is like having an additional full-time job. And that's true, especially true then. I hope it's less true. I don't know that it is. I think it is. It's less true. I'm angry fewer mornings than I used to be. But so whatever I wrote, whenever I got ready to say something, I did it. But I didn't assign an importance to it. There were people that came before me, luckily, who were doing it. You know, the notion that I was a pioneer scares the hell out of me. Luckily, I grew up, there was a guy named Wendell Phillips. I don't want to say Wendell Phillips. Wendell Phillips, the high school. No, his name was Wendell Smith, the great Wendell Smith. And Wendell Smith was a sports writer in Chicago. Wendell Smith was an African-American man who would now be 100 and who knows, 10 years old. And Wendell Smith was on WGN television and writing a column in Chicago when I was a little kid. And so I saw somebody who, quote unquote, looked like me my whole time. It never crossed my mind that there was nobody who looked like me who was doing this. And people come to me like the people come to me in the aughts and the teens and say you were the first person that ever saw, and that scares the hell out of me because I'd seen Wendell Smith doing this in the 1960s. It was 50 years earlier, 40 or 30 or 40 or 50 years earlier, now 60. And so I the whole notion of it, I understand the importance of it. I understand having a different voice and what that meant in the 1980s when there were at one point, you mentioned Brian Burwell, there were 5 black columnists. I remember there were 2. But Roy Johnson, Ralph Wiley, Brian Burwell, myself, that's 4. And then various times, Monty in Oakland, and I'm drawing a blank on my man in Atlanta at the Constitution because I'm having a senior moment as well as I can see his face. There was a small cadre of people who had license to do this. And reading habits are habits. They're habitual. And people don't want to be told what to think who sound different than them. So this was a radical departure for the publications that said this was okay at that time. Whether it was 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of us. I remember Burwell called us with great glee the 5 heartbeats, which is a joke, of course. And there were 5 of us, 5 black columnists in America in the 1990s. Think about that. And so was there pressure? I guess there was hate mail. There was no social media. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care about the threats. There were threats. I didn't go to anybody's security department. There was no security that I know of. Unlike Stephen A., I didn't have a full-time 24-hour bodyguard. I didn't have juvie. So, it's an interesting world that we all grew up in. Stephen A. was at the very end of it. He tasted a little bit of it being like 10 years younger than me. But you had something to say, you said it. And that was the deal. And luckily we had publications that were strong enough, tough enough, smart enough, desiring of diverse readership enough, smart enough business people, in other words, to let us stay out of the way and let us say what we need to say.
Well, and similarly, I mean, there weren't a lot of female sports columnists, still aren't. I had the great pleasure of working with Claire Smith at the Enquirer for a while, and then finally got a column of my own, which was my goal. I remember you telling me I was covering the NBA and the Sixers, and you called me one day and were like, look, if you want to be a columnist on the national level, you have to be able to get the commissioner of the National Football League on the phone. So you need to start covering the Eagles, which is not what I wanted to hear because I was 3 years into covering the NBA and finally had my footing. But yeah, I mean, there weren't a lot of diverse voices.
No.
What do you think the future of sports journalism is going to look like?
I don't know. I'm not good at seeing around corners. But we've got diverse voices because everybody's got a voice. You got a camera, you got a voice. A cell phone, I mean. You got a cell phone, you have a voice. So that's not a problem anymore. Will certain voices rise above the din to be heard and paid special attention to? I guess, but I don't know. This world ain't for me. I'm done. I'm in that way. I'm not going to be at the cutting edge of anything anymore. It's time for somebody else to be at the cutting edge anyway. I don't know that you can be at the cutting edge if you get to be comfortable to a certain degree. And so I've gotten the comfort level I sought, that my ambition sought to create for me and mine. And so I'm not at the cutting edge anymore. And it's okay. It's like you don't do this forever. You shouldn't do it forever. And that's the reason, because other voices need to be heard. And I don't know where they come from. I don't know how they rise above the din specifically. I don't know. Are we going to get a tipping point where there's a disruptor and we get fewer voices and like we used to be, everything seems to go the opposite way after a period of years or decades. And I don't know. I'm not a guy who does well forecasting. We're in an interesting place now where people have abdicated the responsibility. Let me take one more shot at the New York Times. And it's sad, but maybe it creates space for others. Maybe.
All right. All right. We here at Outfoxed, we do 3 closing questions
Okay.
for each guest.
Okay.
So we can, compare apples to apples as it is. And I know you're going to hate this question, but if you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Try more stuff. Try more stuff. Yeah, I'm a typically Midwestern kid with the fears of parents who came from the deep South, the deep, violently segregated South, who did not take chances. Couldn't afford to take chances. You had to know where to stop on the road to drive from Chicago to Atlanta so you could know where you could get a chicken sandwich and not be led to a county jail. So you didn't take chances. So chances aren't something that I grew up understanding because I had 2 parents who couldn't afford to have done it. And so my personality is directly, descendant of theirs. I'd take more chances if I could tell my younger self anything, and not recklessly. I'm just not that person. But some more, open up your life a little bit more than it was at the time.
We talked off air about transitions and kind of, where you're at a place in your life where transition is something that you're dealing with, thinking about. What is the elusive thing you are still striving for?
To shoot lower than 75, which is not going to happen at this stage.
With 44.
Golf reference. No, I don't need an audience to do that. I don't care who I'm with. If I have a good foursome. I don't think there's, I don't have a bucket list. And that's because along the way, first I thought I was going to die at 60 because my father died at 60. Lung cancer, and I haven't smoked a cigarette ever in my life. Still thought I was going to die at 60. So I did everything all the way along. There's no place I haven't been. There's one state I haven't been to. You want to guess what state I haven't been to?
South Dakota.
Maine.
Oh, me too.
Maine's the only one. Maine's your only one?
I have 3.
What are the others?
North and South Dakota.
Oh, wow.
And
Well,
Maine.
you haven't been to see Mount Rushmore. You have to see Mount Rushmore. You have to see Mount Rushmore. But anyway, I don't have a bucket list. I've been everywhere, almost. I haven't been to sub-Saharan Africa, and I want to go, and I will go. But everything else I've done. I didn't wait. I wasn't waiting around. Black men didn't live all that long that I thought we should be waiting around. Many of my relatives died before they died young, and so it wasn't like 82 years old playing chess in the park. That wasn't the experience I grew up with. So I did shit all along. So I don't have any bucket list items. Do I? Not really. I was walking the Great Wall when my mother suffered cardiac arrest and ultimately died right after I flew back from Beijing to Chicago. And that would be one of those, you think bucket list items, walking the Great Wall. I was. And actually, that's what she would want me to do, having been a world traveler twice herself. So no, I don't have, sorry, I don't have, I don't. I want to do the stuff I want to do, which means play golf, be in the sun, see my son grow up and be productive. That's the one bucket list. It always involves people's children. You know that. But that's it, I think.
That's great.
Well, either that or I don't have much ambition anymore. One or the other.
No, you got it done. I mean, you had a heart attack in Arizona at the Super Bowl.
Well, not at the game itself.
Not at the game itself.
No,
the week before.
Before, yeah.
And you were how old?
49. Hadn't turned 50 yet. Yeah, I had a heart attack before I had a kid. It's not a good order to do that.
No.
But, that happened, and it was a wake-up call, to get shit in order, which I did gradually and then, with a little more pace after that. But, that's the ultimate one, probably, for a young man who thinks he's impenetrable to have a heart attack. And, you got to get right quick, or else the consequences can be more dire.
Super. All right, the last one for you, Michael. I don't know if you know this, but here at OUTFOXED, while we talk mostly sports, we do it through the lens of soul.
Okay.
So what does soul mean to you in terms of your career and life?
I don't know. I don't think I'm that smart. Soul means, you say soul to me, I think of two things: music and food. Given my background, that's what I think of. I just think that you stay true to what it is you do. But for me, those are the two things I think of. So I'm going to think of, Marvin Gaye and James Brown, and I'm going to think of candy yams and collard greens and great fried chicken at my Uncle Frank's restaurant in Atlanta. Soul has certain context, I guess. There's a context for everybody. And so for me, it connects in this reference to blackness, although you can certainly have soul without being black. So I readily acknowledge that. But for me, it touches those two things. It goes back to Southern roots. And yes, I grew up in Chicago and never lived a day in the South in my life, but my parents did, and brought all of that on the train from Georgia and Tennessee to our house in Chicago. And that's, people ask about what foods do you like? Southern cuisine. That's the cuisine. That's what I ate. My mother's cooking was influenced by Tennessee and Georgia, because that's where my father's from. So it's food and music, those two. And that probably, I'm sure those things influence other things about what I believe, what I hold dear, what my values are. They're shaped by all of that. And I don't examine it all that often. I just don't. I'm not that introspective. I'm a typical guy of that generation. I don't spend a lot of time holding up a mirror to self. I don't even believe in that shit. I've never been on a shrink sofa. I'm not trying to look inward. I don't get anything out of that. So me examining it, I'm sure that a shrink could go back and get columns of mine and say, aha, here's what, I've never done it. I don't even keep anything I've ever written. I don't have a clip of anything I've ever written. Not a clip. You can find it at the Washington Post. I'm sure it's easy now to call it up somehow if I wanted to. So I don't have I don't know what any of it means. I don't know what much of anything means. I want to see the Cubs win. I want to see the Bears get the right coach. I want to see the Bulls are in my life before I die. It's connected to stuff like that. This doesn't mean anything to anyone else. But I don't care about that. I don't care about what their wishes are. They can get their own set. When OUTFOXED comes to talk to them, they can describe what those wishes are. Mine are pretty simple.
The great Michael Wilbon.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate
Thank
you.
you, Ash.
Thank you. OUTFOXED is a mostly sports podcast with soul. Hosted by me, Ashley Fox. OUTFOXED is proudly produced in Philadelphia by Dearest Media in collaboration with Blow My Mind podcast.